Like, you're aware enough of what's going on in the world. Puberty is so far away. And for me, it would probably be another decade or so away. And I was living out in San Antonio, Texas. So for those who don't know, San Antonio, Texas is very southern, conservative, red state. On top of that, my family was a military family, and I was a Mormon. So I was a Mormon growing up in an area where it was mostly Southern Baptists. So I was already well aware that I was really different, and I knew that difference was something that wasn't so great, mainly because the Mormon prophet on one Sunday had been beamed into our church saying homosexuality was a sin akin to murder, and I already had a crush on the boy down the street. So I was like, that's not going to work well for me. So I was pretty well invested in just hiding difference. Like, if you're different, just push that down. And I also was incredibly shy, so I didn't have many friends. And this story was this one day I was out in a swimming pool, and I remember putting my mask on. You spit into the little glass mask and you rub it around so there's no steam on it, and I pressed it onto my face, and I went down under the water, and I just remember the comfort of feeling incredibly alone under the water. Under the water, no one could see me, no one could hear me. That sort of isolation felt very comforting. And I remember in that day looking over, and there was these very pale legs in the water that met these forest green trunks that were way too big, and this incredibly lanky body, and then it was cut off. The water was hitting this person right about here, and so you couldn't see anything from there on up. And I remember looking at him and his body and going, gosh, I hope I'm not that skinny. This guy's really, really bony-chested, and realizing I was just as bad, and we were really pretty screwed. And then he dove under the water, and I turned away so I wasn't looking anymore, and we very quickly went to work doing what you did as 8-year-old kids in Texas in a swimming pool, which is collecting the action figures we had discarded on the bottom of the pool. He started collecting the good guys, like Princess Leia and the army soldier little guys. I knew I would be defeated, because in Texas, the bad guys can never win, the bad guys. And so I was Darth Vader and all of that. And we started to play our little battle out, like we did every single day after school in his above-ground pool, which is really for working class plus, I guess. You know what I mean? You could afford that, but not a real pool. Still, for me, I was really broke, so it was really fancy. I dug it. But he really wasn't fighting back. I remember very clearly at one point, there's these G.I. Joe figures, and I had Snake Eyes, and I shot an imaginary laser beam from Snake Eyes all the way over to Princess Leia, and claimed that I had melted her breasts off. Now, normally that would elicit a really bad response, right? He would protest, and Han Solo would fight back, and there would be this raging battle in the pool. This day, he didn't fight back, he just got quiet, and we stopped fighting. And I was something is terribly wrong. And he got very, very quiet, and I just sort of ignored him for a bit. I could tell something was weighing on him, but we had a deal. We did not discuss our somethings, those things that really got to us, right? That was the basis of our friendship, was not to discuss those sorts of things. And then he said to me, I remember at one point he said, my mother thinks I should share something with you. And I was like, holy fuck. I mean, I didn't say that, because a Mormon child was not allowed to say that. But in my mind, I said that to myself, and I thought, you shouldn't do that. You absolutely shouldn't do that. But I was also very shy, so all that came out of my mouth was, oh, yeah? And that didn't stop him. So he proceeded to tell me a something, which you're not supposed to tell. And this was this first moment that anyone ever came out to me. But he came out to me. He said, my mom wants me to tell you that I'm Jewish. And I was I remember just racking my brain, right? I was already a writer brain, so I was racking my brain for the vocabulary. What is a Jewish? I'd never heard of a Jewish before. I didn't know what a Jewish was. Was it some sort of a disease? Could I catch a Jewish? Could I bring it home? Was it terminal? Would it kill my mom? Would it kill my brother? We had enough problems as it was. I couldn't bring a Jewish home, right? So I got out of the pool, and I started drying myself off, And I thought, well, we shouldn't discuss this any further. I looked inside. I saw his mom inside. I wonder if she had a Jewish. She was staring at us with too much curiosity. And I started asking questions, because sometimes curiosity gets the best of me. I'm amongst friends, I think, in that department. And so I started asking about what this was, and I quickly figured out it wasn't a disease. It was something akin to a tribe. And I knew I had a tribe of the homosexuals I had heard about in church, and I knew you were supposed to keep that secret. And I was curious why he didn't keep his damn tribe a secret. And I wanted to know what it was. And then he told me they didn't believe. They thought that the Old Testament was fine, but the New Testament was, cute, but probably baloney. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting, because in my church, we have the Old Testament, the New Testament, and everyone at school thinks my Book of Mormon is baloney. So I can sort of get that some people think other people's testaments are baloney. But I thought, at least he must be a Christian, right? Because that's what I was able to tell my friends at school. And they usually would leave me alone after that. So I said to him, well, at least you're a Christian. And he was like, no, not that either. And I was like, well, what about Christmas? And he's like, yeah, we don't have Christmas, we don't have Jesus, we don't have Christianity, I'm a Jewish. And I was like, what are you even talking about? What do you fill your year with if you're not celebrating Christmas? That's all I think about. That's all we do is presents. I got very, very upset, and I decided what I was going to do was try to become a missionary. Do you know Mormon missionaries? Like, I'm 8. I had 10 years to go before I'd be any good at it. And so I thought I got to try it on. He's my one and only friend. I cannot lose him today. And so I proceeded to tell him that a young man named Joseph Smith in New York walked into the woods, and God and Jesus visited him and told him that all of these native people, good native people with white skin and bad native people with dark skin, got in these wars in the Americas, and Jesus had come over to visit them after his crucifixion to say, hey, I'm not leaving you guys out of this salvation thing. Because I thought Troy must have become a Jewish because he thought, well, it's not fair. How could you only go to heaven if you believe in Jesus, but Jesus only visited one part of the world? And I said, no, he visited the whole part. They just hadn't read Joseph Smith, the kid who found these books in a forest in New York. If they just read that, they would know he came and visited everyone. And now it's completely fair, so you should become a Mormon Christian. And he wasn't buying it. And he said, well, what are we, and so I added this extra benefit. I said, no, you don't understand. Like, there's also this thing, like, if you decide to be a good Mormon Christian and leave behind your Jewish, you also get a perfect body in heaven. You get to bring this body you have here on earth up to heaven with you. And I remember we just both looked at our terrible, skinny, bony little bodies, and we were like, if the purpose was to come down here to get a body, we've gotten royally screwed. Like, does that mean that heaven's going to be as bad as earth has been? He didn't want this business that Mormons say, that we come down here just to get a body, because we both had bony bodies that were far from puberty, and he wasn't buying it. And I just remember he finally, after me begging him to let go of this thing that was just far too different, me explaining I was already catching hell for being Mormon in a Baptist area, that he was going to become an absolute pariah. This was dangerous for him and his family. And he just got up and he shuffled inside and he said, see you later. And I remember the look his mom threw me through that sliding glass door. And I didn't quite get it yet. I got on my bike that was in the front yard, crappy old bike, and rode home in tears, because I started that day with one friend, I ended that day with no friends. And it's because I had been taught that difference was bad, that it's something we should hide. And it wouldn't be for, I would say, 5 or 6 years when we finally moved to Central Coast in California. My mom had remarried, and I was in Salinas, California, which is just south of San Francisco. And we had a textbook in a history class, and there was a week dedicated to World War II. And in that book, by Friday, we got to the page that had these symbols in it. And in it was a yellow star of David and an upside-down pink triangle. And for the first time in my life, I had a teacher explain to me what Jewish was, and also what had happened to the Jewish people in World War II, and what that Star of David meant when it was sewed onto their clothing, and the torture that had taken place, and the murders that had taken place. And I started to think in that moment, it was a big moment for me, I realized that that shuffle my friend Troy had done into the house wasn't shame. It was that he knew he was losing a friend too, but there was something about his difference that was worthy of struggle, that there was some value in it, and that look that his mother gave me was protective of that difference because it was valuable, and there was value there. And I started to think of difference in a different way. What I wish had happened in this examination of difference is that teacher had told us what that pink triangle meant. And that teacher never told us what that pink triangle meant. The textbook didn't tell us what that pink triangle meant. I probably wouldn't find out what that pink triangle meant for years. But eventually, as I became a teenager and started going into San Francisco, I learned that, of course, my tribe and my people had suffered alongside Troy's tribe and Troy's people. If I had known, if I had been taught that difference was okay and difference was valuable, taught that examining difference was okay and valuable, that difference is actually where we can derive our power. It's what might make us unique enough that we can be a unique voice as an artist, that our perspective might bring value to law and to science as an outsider. If I had known that, I would have ended that day stronger with Troy. And particularly, and I think this is most important to pay attention to right now in the world, if I had understood that there was a brotherhood of differences, that people who are outsiders and people who are different have something in common, have many things in common, that I had a brotherhood with Troy, I would not have ended that day riding my bicycle home in tears, feeling isolated and alone and weaker. I would have ended that day far stronger. And I would say that's one of the stories that was formative for me. One of the stories that set me on a path to understanding the power of knowing who our outsiders are, what the value of being an outsider is, and in the end of the day, what is the power of story? What is the power of story to give strength, to create coalitions, so that we can push that arc of history closer and closer to justice. So from there, we get into maybe some of your questions, which is,